Jeez, there we go. Well, then what happens? Basically, then what happens to this whole story? Well, the whole story is that the whole story doesn't come out for about another 8 months or so, because the military begins to hear about it, and they're like, apparently the operation is a success. I mean, nobody reports on it. There's this phenomenal body count, and everything's fine. So the men go back to their base, and nothing happens, right? Well, it turns out that this fellow here was one of what Lincoln would call one of the better angels of our nature. Jeez, come on, there we go. Okay, so here's Chief Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson. And what he does is, here he is at the time, okay, he's probably on that side. The young Hugh Thompson is probably on that side, and the older Hugh Thompson is probably on that side. And then down below me, he's shaking hands with one of his fellow veterans. Okay, so why is Hugh Thompson important? Well, Hugh Thompson was flying a helicopter that day. And when he sees what is happening, and he realizes what is happening on the ground, and this is one of these amazing stories, and this is why he's got this medal that he's looking down at. He lands his helicopter between the American forces and the surviving Vietnamese from My Lai. This is why they weren't all killed, right? Except that the guns are pointed at the Americans. And so he's got his door gunner, who is pointing a 50 caliber machine gun at the Americans. And he basically says to them, stop firing. And as long as the helicopter is in the way, the Americans are like, well, we can't fire on our own helicopter. These are our guys. So they stop firing. And every time Thompson goes to lift or extract the people from My Lai, he can see that they might very well, the men on the ground, Americans on the ground, might very well start firing again. So he stays on the ground as long as he can. And excuse me, and basically saves these people. And this is why, and he then testifies, he's going to testify about it, and this is why he's given this medal near the end of his life, because as you can see, he dies in 2006. Probably dies of Agent Orange related causes. It's not known. Okay, so he's there and he sees what's happening. So he's a witness. Okay, and that's going to be very important, apart from the fact that he saves people, which is the most important thing, probably. Certainly the most important thing for them. Then we have Ron Ridenour. Gee, excuse me. And Ron Ridenour, who was a GI at the time, and you can see him here, where the lowest image is him as a young man, and then as an older man. And then here he is giving an anti-war speech just before, ironically, just before the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he goes on being a very important spokesperson against or for the anti-war cause. Okay. Ridenour has heard the story about the massacre, as many people did. And this is the thing about these stories, is that they start to get out. And so the men, the GIs, the grunts, begin to tell the story. They begin to say, did you hear what happened in My Lai? And the story spreads. So it's generally known in the military, certainly in the Americal division, which is huge, that there was a massacre. And finally, Ron Ridenour writes a letter. He tries to get an investigation going, and the military sends an investigator. And this is who they send. Do I have an image of it here? Yeah. And this is who they sent. At the time, they sent Colin Powell. Now, you may recognize Colin Powell. This is the kind of, remember I was talking about this, chest full of ribbons. So here's a chest full mission ribbons or theater. These are medals that would have been earned. And you can see the other, this is what Huff talks about, or I can't remember, talks about as the battle stars. These are the kinds of things that would be added, including the CIB, the Combat Infantry badge, which is the blue oblong with the silver gun in it, which is specific, can only be worn by people who have been under fire. So I'll just move over here. So the black and white image here is Nixon shaking Colin Powell's hand. And then you can see that the image has been signed by Nixon in 1971. And so here is the youngest, most successful 4-star African-American general in the military at this time. And so I've taken the military produces these publicity shots, which are usually used for public consumption. Down at the bottom is the image of Colin Powell holding up a tube of what is supposed to be anthrax. It's not actually, at the UN, saying that this is the case for going to war in Iraq, that Colin Powell specifically will be sent to make. And the Bush White House, the second Bush White House, the George W. Bush White House, will use Colin Powell to make this case. Well, this is the guy they send to the Army sends to investigate the massacre in My Lai. And what does Colin Powell say? Colin Powell says, well, it's not really clear that there was anything wrong. We went and investigated, and it was it's war. Too bad. It was harsh. But that's what happens. The men acted did their best, and no problem. So that's Colin Powell, and he's going to be important in a couple of weeks. So here's Hugh Thompson, who one of the people who acts well that day, and Ron Ridenour, who is important for getting the story out. He writes, so he sees the military isn't going to do anything. They buried the massacre, basically. So he writes a letter to his congressman, and the congressman is like, what? And they start to investigate. And this produces an investigation of the whole thing. And now it blows open. And now it becomes a huge case in the United States. And the focus is on these two guys who were in charge, because Calley was on the ground. But these are the guys who I call perpetrators, because they perpetrated, basically they brought about the action, right? Colonel Orrin Henderson and Medina. Now, Medina is probably the most famous or infamous of these two characters, because Medina was pressing Calley for a body count. Now, just because he pressed Calley for a body count doesn't mean that Calley was supposed to go out, or, that the right thing to do was for him to go out and slaughter a village. But this is often given as, like, people are like, well, how did this happen? Did they just wandered into the village and somebody started shooting and everybody else was like, hell yeah, let's just kill some Vietnamese. We don't care. We don't care if they're women and children. We don't care. As you can see, there's one male body that I've counted when you look at these images. So here are these two guys. You can see, these are hardcore dudes. And they are being pressed on and by the system because this is the policy. The policy is high body count. Well, if that's your policy, then you push your juniors to go and get a body count. And they pushed Calley, and Calley went and did it, right? He just didn't care who he killed. He was just like, oh, you want a body count? I'll get you one. So he did. So when it came time for people to be investigated, the senior officers, that is anybody above lieutenant, was basically washed clean. So the captain and the colonel, who were next in the chain of, actually there should be a major in there, but these guys are the next chain of command, were washed clean. So nothing happened to them. The person that people began to focus on was Rusty Calley. And so here's the image of Calley at the time. And you can see he's wearing the CIB, the Combat Infantry badge. which is always distinctive. You would look for that, because if the person doesn't have it, it means they weren't under fire, and so generally they're considered to be less. They're not real men yet, because they haven't been under fire. It's a super macho, stupid thing. Okay, and then you can see the blue in the little picture above me. It's probably on this side. You can see this blurry picture of Kali where this oval is blue, same badge. And there's Kali lower. He's probably on this side. And then there's Kali in 1991 in Cross Plaza, where he's holding an umbrella. And so this is Kali today, basically, or what was today now, 20 some years ago. Believe it or not, he's still alive. It always blows my mind that basically mass murderers like this just live and live and live. Anyway, and just the two people who intervened, Ridenour and Thompson, who were basically the whistleblowers and or the potential interveners, basically, have already died. Anyway,